Welcome, guys. We are to the new Excelsior talk. Today, we have the pleasure to speak with one of the most prepared and famous coach, the man who coached a lot of champions like Jan Valler, Aaron Polites, Nicholas Vuilloud, and many other great athletes. The creator of the sarcoplasmic stimulation training. Ladies and gentlemen, Patrick Tuor. Hi, Patrick. How are you?
Hey, Luca. Thanks for having me. I'm fine, and we both live very close to the center of the coronavirus pandemic, so close to Milan. I live like 60 kilometers from Milan, and you live right inside, so really hard times, but we're trying to do the best with it. So appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Great to hear you for you. And let's start with the main themes of these days, the pandemic, the coronavirus, as you said, the virus that is infecting all the world. Now, as you know, Italy is one of the most affected nations from coronavirus, and we are living in a real situation. We are locked in our home and can live a normal life. Most people can't work, and a lot of us who love fitness bodybuilding can't work out in the gym since 3 weeks ago. How is the situation there? And have you some advice to the people who now are stopping their home and can't work out?
Yeah, that's probably an issue that I have to deal with every day because pretty much the entire world has shut down the normal activity. So everybody is in some type of lockdown. But what's concerning us is the gyms. So most of the gyms, anywhere from South America to Australia, are closed. So as a bodybuilder and a high-level bodybuilder, it's very, very difficult to keep a prep going and keep the gains, keep the muscle mass. So right now, the advice that I'm giving is mostly health related. It's very important that, and coming back to your question, I live in Lugano, which is 60 kilometers from Milano. I live right across the border from Italy. So the situation we're living here is exactly the same. So we're in lockdown and we're only allowed to go to the supermarket to get groceries, and that one person at a time. So I know exactly where you're coming from, and it's very, very difficult. But concerning training, I think right now the most important aspect is really trying to, if you want, take advantage of this horrible situation and make sure we recuperate. We do something to help our recovery, to help our system, our organic system, to recover from past preparations. Many were in contest prep, some were in off season. But if we want to see something positive in all of this, it's that willing or not, we have a chance to really take care of our health right now. So I think the first aspect that I try to give back to my athletes is try to understand that it's very important to keep a healthy diet. Probably some tricks that you have to do is reduce total protein intake because you don't have the training stress anymore. So probably the amount of protein that you need needs to be reduced a little bit. I always try and I always favor high carb intake. So try to keep the carbs as high as possible, but this always maintaining a good body fat level. That's very important if you want to be healthy. But just to help detoxification processes, probably animal protein needs to be reduced a little bit. Most of the time, I like to work around 1 to 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, not more. This really speeds up your recovery, your inflammation processes, and your kidney and liver function. Another aspect of a healthy diet is probably to have a little more fruits and vegetables, which usually like fruits, bodybuilders are not really using too much because we all know that fructose is a simple sugar that it's converted only into liver glycogen. So it doesn't really have any advantage to a bodybuilder if used too much. But in this case, I try to have a little more fresh fruits, increase the amount of fresh vegetables that we eat, and sometimes switch to, instead of eating more nutrient-dense protein sources like beef, for example, or salmon, switch to instead of salmon, use white fish, and instead of beef, maybe use some turkey or some chicken, and sometimes some egg whites. Just make sure that the body has an easier time to digest and to assimilate nutrients. So this is one aspect. Obviously, there are also many supplements that you can take to help liver function, kidney function. Have a very high water intake, and be really careful also controlling your blood pressure, decreasing sodium intake, measuring sodium intake. So even in this type of situation, we need to be very strict. I mean, we're bodybuilders, whether we can go to the gym or not. I see it as a 365 days job. So it's not something that you do when you can, and when you can't, you just shit on it. So I really try to advise to make sure you have a healthy diet. And then in terms of training, well, for God's sakes, we have to do anything that we can to keep a good cardiovascular function, especially for athletes who, train daily, maybe once, maybe even twice a day. You can't just stop cold turkey because it's really not healthy, especially concerning your heart function. So I advise to keep some type of cardio activity. Most of the time, I like a more intense cardio activity, like a HIIT activity, shorter but more intense. This has a bit of higher impact on your cardiovascular system, on your caloric turnover. So a little more intense cardio activity, maybe shorter, and then try to find whatever you can inside your house, maybe with a little rubber band, or as stupid as it may sound, but maybe with little dumbbells. Do some push-ups, do some pull-ups, do some one-legged squats, anything that can keep the muscle active, your blood flow, and really keep your muscle active and your metabolism up. So anything that you can do, I suggest you do. So even though we can't go in a gym, we have to be smart and make sure we take care of our body and keep healthy, and also respect the fact that we are professional athletes, that we are athletes, and we have to behave like it, even if we don't have a chance to go to the gym.
Yeah, great. This is a great advice for our listeners. Then resume with a low protein intake, medium carbs, and workout with all you have in your home. And of course, cardiovascular activity is so important for your health, and control the blood pressure, as you said before.
Exactly.
Great, and thanks for your advice. And then we can start to speak about what we love to do. I want to start to speak about your beginning in the bodybuilding, and a lot of people know you only for your career of a coach. But what about your start, and why you start to play bodybuilding? Tell us something about your first approaches.
Well, I actually was a professional basketball player before I went into bodybuilding. And I went to university in the United States, first high school, then university, and played in Division I basketball. And then I was supposed to come back to Europe with a contract to play in Italy. My agent had actually got me a contract to play in Varese. At the time, Varese is right across the border. It's very close to Milan. They had a very good team. They played in a professional A League in Italy. But unfortunately, I could not play because the contract that was given to me was a European contract, which means that since I was, from Switzerland, they were supposing that I would play as a European. But back in 1993, Switzerland was not part of the European agreement, of the bilateral agreements and the Schengen agreements that we have here in Europe. So my contract was not seen as a European contract, but as a foreigner. So I was on the same level as anybody coming from outside Europe, like Americans. And when they found out about that, I was not able to play. So I found myself coming back to Switzerland to play in the professional league in Switzerland, but I found it very little motivating. I left home with 15 years of age to go to the US, and then came back, hopes of playing professional basketball. And then, finding myself again playing here, I was very demoralized. So I actually stopped. And I've always, trained in the gym, which we used to do in college. And I started to take it more seriously, and within about 1 year, not even 1 year later, I competed in my first bodybuilding show, and I really liked the fact that I was depending on nobody, that the result was only really depending on my efforts, and nobody would tell me what to do and when to do it. So I really went from a team sports to an individual sport, and I like that. And ever since, I've been bodybuilding and did my first show in 1994 and won the world championships in 1999, which I turned professional, and competed a few times as a pro until I realized that I didn't have the right genetic makeup to really be a high level professional athlete. So I'm not somebody who tries to pretend that my head is stronger than the wall. So instead of trying to go through it, I stopped competing as a professional and start working in the supplement industry, gym and supplement industry. And I've always been coaching athletes since my first competition, practically always trying to help other people. And it just came as an evolution since then.
Yes, this is an important feature about you, because be realistic. Be realistic is one of the feature that a lot of people don't understand, because be realistic is so important about our genetics. Because if I'm not a tall man, I can't swim like Michael Phelps, as you know. And then it's so important to be realistic in ourselves. This is an important thing, and really great to know about you. Then about you was a great athlete and become an IFBB Pro. Yes. And when and why you start your career as a coach? You say that you stop when you discover that you are not a good athlete, but bodybuilding is a passion. But why you love so much coached athlete?
Well, actually, coaching athlete was something I've always done. For example, prepping for my first competition back in 1993, 94, I was competing against my training partner. And at the beginning, I didn't know very much about bodybuilding, as you can imagine, come from basketball. And back then, we had no internet, and we had no coaches who you could go to and ask for advice. So I really started to learn everything that I could. And somehow people started to come to me, come ask for advice, what I was thinking about nutrition, about training. And I really didn't, there wasn't one day where I said, okay, I want to become a coach. It's just something that evolved. And all of a sudden I was training most of the athletes in Switzerland. And then, as you know, oh, you're very young, but as you know, I started to coach a lot of athletes in Italy and in Germany. So it really was like a snowball effect. You know, there wasn't one day where I said, okay, I want to be a coach. Just something that I started doing, and all of a sudden I was having so many athletes, and especially high-level athletes, that I decided to make it a full-time job. But before that, I owned 2 gyms. I owned some supplement shops. So it's not something that I decided from one day to the other. So it was a pretty tough decision to make. But at one point in time, if you try to handle too many things, you're not really good in any of the things that you do. So it was about 8 years ago, 7, 8 years ago, where I said, okay, I'm going to do this full time. And I sold my businesses slowly within about a 2-year span. And since then, I've been coaching full time.
Yeah, then you speak about you have coached a lot of great athletes, and you have big athletes and great athletes like Olympian athletes, as we know. And I follow you since 2014, when you shared a small video on Facebook about training nutrition. And by the way, you coached a lot of champions, and how is coached some of the most important athletes like Aaron Politis, the Olympia 212, and Nikolas Vuilloud, and many others. How is?
Well, one thing that I have to say is that everybody is very different. Not just body types wise, but also mentally, everybody's different. So I really have different relationships with everybody. There are some athletes which you develop more friendly relationships. There are some athletes maybe that you hear daily because you talk about anything concerning, what happens in your life. And then there are other athletes who the prep is very technical. So not just the prep in itself, so what you do nutrition wise and supplement wise is different, but also the approach that you adopt, the relation that you have with every athlete is very different. So over the years, I was lucky enough to be able to work with some of really some of the greatest athletes in the sport, and with all of them, I have some kind of relationship, but it's very different. So if you ask me how it is, it's very subjective, it's very different. And also sometimes it evolves. Sometimes you go through some difficult times, not only prep wise, but in the life. And then you get a stronger relationship with some of them. So it's very, very different, but I wouldn't change my job for any other job in the world.
Yeah, great. This is amazing. And yes, about the relationship, you have a particular relationship with one of your athletes, and this is Nikolas Vuilloud, because I think, for him, you are his bodybuilding father, I think, because he was one of your first athletes, one of your important athletes that become year after year always better, improve with your method. And could you tell us something about your relationship and how you started your collaboration with him?
Well, with Nikolas, yeah, I think a few coaches have the relationship that I have with Nikolas because, well, first of all, when we started to work together, we were living very close to each other. At the time, I was living in the French part of Switzerland, where Nikolas lives today still. And he actually, found out about me through another athlete that I coached, which is a Swiss athlete who went to the Mr. Olympia in the 202 class back then. So people don't even know about him probably, see, but he won a professional show, went to the Olympia, and he was living in the same town as Nikolas. And Nikolas started to get into bodybuilding through him. And he was an athlete that I was coaching. So at one point, he just said, look, maybe go talk to me, in this case, and see what you can do with him, because Sergio was his name, Sergio Pereira. He was working, so he didn't really have any extra time, and he has a family too. So he came with his mother at the time. They drove about a 40-minute drive to come and see me, and he came with his mom. She was really concerned about the fact that he wanted to start bodybuilding, but I really liked it. As I have with many athletes, sometimes I have some type of relationships with their parents because they start young, and the parents, as you can imagine, are a little bit concerned about what they eventually have to go through. So I like to reassure them and that they are aware of what's going on. So he came to the gym I was owning at the time in Sion here in Switzerland, and he was probably weighing around 60 kilos, maybe something like that. And you could see that he had a mesomorphic type of physique, but really structurally nothing was flowing. I mean, he had some good legs and then a long torso, and he was really strange looking. But one thing that I immediately picked up was the fact that he was very passionate and serious about what he was going to do. And that was back in 2012. And so I really just threw him into cold water, as you say. He wanted to learn to swim, and I didn't give him any swimming lesson, just threw him in the swimming pool. And I said, okay, let's do this. And about 5 months later, he competed in the Junior European Championships, but we didn't use any chemical enhancement, so he was totally drug-free. That was one of my first rules that I set him. I said, look, let's start seeing how much you're serious about this and how much you're willing to really dig deep in order to see how good you can be. So we did everything completely drug-free. And he did the European Junior Championships drug-free. He didn't win the show. I think he didn't even make the finals at the time, but you could see that the potential was really, really there. So, and ever since, it was a continuous long-term plan. And that's one thing that I really appreciate about Nikolas is that he has always been a good listener, and he has never wanted to do things his own way or go faster than what we had in mind. So really set out a 5-6 year plan before we wanted to reach high level competitions, and that's actually what he did. He kept improving every year. He kept reshaping his body, starting to flow better, improving his upper body size, and he turned professional in was it 2016, I think. So it took him 4 years actually to turn pro, but and even then when he turned pro, he still had a lot of margin to improve.
Yeah.
And it's a special relationship again because I have it with his mother, which we hear each other all the time, and it's special because I really try to live through Nikolas what I was not able to achieve. I turned pro, but I knew that as a pro, I didn't have what it took to come there. So I had the pleasure of doing this. I still have, because he's such a good listener, and he always puts 100% of the work in that I ask him to do. And I could live through him what I did not, was not able to achieve, and that's go to the Mr. Olympia. So that's probably, it's very special, yeah.
Yeah, I remember this year when Nikolas arrived to the Olympia. Great memories about it. Then, great. And about the greatest athletes you coached, what do these champions have in common? Overall, about mentality, what is the main feature?
Well, I think, first of all, they clearly have the right genes, genetics to make it. Because in this sport, you can talk about mental toughness, you can talk about your mental attitude, which is extremely important, but you need to have the right genetic makeup physically. If you don't have, I know a lot of very disciplined and hardworking athletes, but they will just never make it big time because it's just not written in their DNA. But I think what they most have in common is really this hunger to achieve the goals they set out to do, and especially in difficult times, because every person goes through difficult times in their lives. Maybe an injury, maybe an economic problem, maybe a family problem. Any type of problem that you go through, this type of people always find a way and the time to keep their work ethic and to keep working hard. So it's really mental toughness, not when things go well, but when things don't go your way, when you don't have the response that you're looking for whatever reason it is, they are able to keep focused and go through it, whatever it takes. So I think when you get to a very high level, that's exactly what puts these people in common is their relentless
and the willpower
attachment. Exactly.
The willpower about all. Yes, is the main factor for I think the same, because willpower for with the basic of the genetic is the most important thing to achieve something great, something big, of course. Great. We can now speak about your training system, because you are the creator of the SST, the sarcoplasmic stimulation training. What is different for, and what are its principles? Can you give some example?
Well,
I know this is a big discussion. We need a lot of time for it to speak about it. I want only some principles about.
Yeah. Obviously, there are many ways to train and to have results. There is not one best way to train or one best way to do a diet. There is just respecting certain physiological and biochemical principles. That's actually all. So first thing, I don't like to call SST a method, because a method is something that is standard and fixed. That means there's one way to do it. That's a method of doing things. SST is a philosophy. That means is a way of interpreting, analyzing, and doing structuring your training. And actually, once you know what the principles of muscle stimulations are, it's really not so difficult to understand why it's so effective. It's taking everything that a bodybuilder has in terms of tools to structure a training and trying to make sense of it and put it together. So when you have a training, when you want to train, you have the choice of the exercise that you do. You have the choice of the form that you use. You have the choice of the weight that you're going to use. You have a choice of how many repetitions that you do and in what tempo you do those repetitions. You have the choice of how much time you take between your training sets, and you have the choice of how many of these sets you want to do. Once you take all of these factors, then you have to understand how to use all of these aspects of a training and make the most sense out of it. You know, what way is your body going to respond the way it needs in order to have new synthesis, new muscle growth? So basically in training, you have two main, let's say, aspects, which is a tensional part of your training, which is the heavy anaerobic part of your training. And you have what we call a metabolic stress, metabolic part of your training, which means what impact does your training have on the energy output that you use, the time under tension that you use, and how much it impacts your metabolic response. So one is more weight related, and the metabolic part is more related to the time under tension, the famous TUT. So how much time? Now, this part, the time under tension part, you can also change, not only the tensional part. That means tensional part means anywhere from 2 to 10, 12 repetitions probably. So you can choose a rep range in there you want to work. And then the metabolic part doesn't simply mean that you do more and more and more repetitions. It means how you perform these repetitions. I mean, in what tempo that you do a eccentric or a concentric contraction. It means what interval, rest interval that you use between the various sets, and for how long the set is going to last. So once you understand these two parts, and they stress your whole body, your whole organic system differently, each of those two have a certain type of information that goes inside your body. And now you just have to understand how much of each and in which way you want to connect them. One important aspect of the SST training is there's always an interrelation. That means they're always connected. There isn't just a plain heavy set, then there is rest, and then there is a metabolic stress. There is always either a metabolic attention or a metabolic stress inside a set. This way, you have the most efficient information that goes into your muscle. So now you have to understand how you want to construct your sets in order to be either more tensional, more metabolic, or how much of each you want to have. And then also how you structure your entire training around this philosophy. So there isn't one right way to do SST. So when I do my seminars, when I try to explain the SST, is you have to follow certain rules. But to know what rules you have to follow, you have to understand where you're coming from. What are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? And in function of that, you structure your set, and then you structure your whole training. Why did I call it sarcoplasmic? Simply because the reticulum sarcoplasmaticum, the space that surrounds the myofibrils is the hardest and the most deepest point which you can reach through a training. And how you reach that stimulation is more important than anything else. That means, as you know, in physics, for example, you use the law action equal reaction. And this is what the bodybuilder needs to understand. A muscle will react, will grow, will adapt exactly proportionally to the stress that goes into it. So what you have to understand is how this stress has to be in order to get exactly the type of reaction that you want to get. In the sarcoplasmic space, the sarcoplasm is exactly what we have to understand differentiates a bodybuilder, for example, from a power lifter. Why is a bodybuilder bigger, rounder, fuller than a bodybuilder, than a power lifter, which sometimes is stronger, but uses just as many drugs and eats just as much food? Once you understand the variables that will differentiate a bodybuilder from a power lifter, for example, then you understand how to use them in order to really make your growth more efficient. So it's not that SST is something revolutionary, totally different. No, it's just simply trying to make sense of what you do in order not to waste energy and not to waste time. It's not how long and how heavy you want to train, but how efficiently this stimulation is. Action equal reaction. So the principle that Mike Mentzer back 40 years ago said is the least amount of stress possible for the most amount of result. So a training session, the shorter a training session is, the more efficient, the easier it is for your body to have time to grow and keep improving from workout to workout. So this is just trying to make sense of what sarcoplasmic stimulating training is.
Yes, this is a really, really great explanation for us, because a lot of guys speak about SST, but no one speak exactly what is about, because is a scientific approach, I think, as you know, and you explain, and it about scientific, you can do it if you learn about it, then you have to study it. I advise all our listeners to go to the seminary of Patrick and listen about his system, because it's so important to have a big window in the bodybuilding world, because listen about the different system is so important to improve our knowledge in the gym. Then about it.
I developed, for example, for the SST, 3 main variables. So coming back to the aspects that can compose a training, I use, just for people to understand, a variable that, or a ideal set that was based on solely on changing the contraction. I mean, speeding or slowing down a contraction. Then a variable where we were focusing more on the weight, on the amount of weight that we were using, and a variable where we focused more on the intervals that we had between a certain amount of reps. And all those 3 variables were studied in a university, and the study is published in Frontiers of Physiology. That is the acute response of sarcoplasmic stimulating training versus a traditional training. So they analyzed doing a normal set of, for example, 8 to 10 repetitions compared to any of those 3 variables that I said, and they looked at the physiological and biochemical response that we had from this. So this is an acute response. Now we're working on the chronic response, which means, over a certain amount of time, 2 to 4 to 6 months. So the acute response was clearly more efficient in terms of growth than a normal training. But you could probably say this about a drop set, you could say this about a superset, but then we have to see in the long term, the chronic response, how it's going to be. So for those who are interested, you can go on Frontiers in Physiology, and you can look up the acute response of new method sarcoplasma stimulating training versus traditional training. And you can see a 10-page study which analyzed every biochemical aspect of the SST and the advantage it gives you over traditional training.
Yes, after this call, I will ask you about the link, and I will put it in
I will send you the study. Yeah.
Of course, thank you. And then in the past, I asked you about a thing, about how to learn in this world. I think it's many years ago, then you don't remember, you forgot about it. But the best way to learn about bodybuilding. And you said to me that was experience, theory, and stay and speak with some of the best guru in the world. Stay with the best is the best thing to achieve knowledge quickly, than only to learn on the books. Then today, are you still agree about it? And do you think experience is more important than theory?
No, I don't think that experience is more important. I think that experience is just as important. Um, you can, when you want to acquire knowledge, there is two ways you can become more knowledgeable at something. That is either with induction or with deduction. That means deduction means you have an information, a finished information, but then you need to understand why this information is valuable. And that's what most athletes get. They have a trainer, they have maybe a very famous trainer, and they get a certain program, they get a certain information from them. But just because you get the information does not mean that you can apply it to you maybe in another prep or to somebody else. This is called deduction. That means I get the end result of the information that I need, but then you need to learn, need to understand why this type of information is valuable, is right. And for this, you need theory, right? If you don't have the theory, then how can you make sense of what is being told to you? Deduction. Induction starts with theory and then goes into practice. That means you study, you try to understand the physiological, the biochemical process of nutrition, of training, and then you go to the gym and try to make sense of it. And this is by induction. So either way that you put it, you will need to study, to learn the theory in order to make sense of it all. I know there are many famous trainers who have extremely good results with their athletes, but they go by feeling. They go by because it's always been done that way, because they have seen it do this way. And that works. But I had never accepted this because I always wanted to understand why we do a certain thing. Because when you understand why you do a certain process, maybe in training, maybe because of performance enhancing drugs, maybe because of nutrition, in any of those aspects, if you understand why, then you can adapt it to every athlete. If you just go by the feeling, if you just go by what you think that is right, maybe 5 times out of 10, you will be right. But there's great chances that the other 5 times, it will not work perfectly to what you set out to do. So either by induction or by deduction, you need to learn. You need to go over the books. In bodybuilding, I know genes, genetics are so important, drugs and genetics. And you can become an Olympian athlete without knowing what you do. And there's many out there. But as a trainer, if you want to be a trainer, I think it's for your sake and for the athlete's health and sake, it's good that you understand why you do certain things. And if you don't understand and if you cannot explain certain processes, then don't do them.
Yes, about to learn. As I said before, you are one of the most prepared coach in the world because you study a lot. You achieve a lot of knowledge in the time, and when you stop your career as athlete. And then about your knowledge, I want to speak about nutrition, but an easy question: how important is the quality of the food?
Well, I think when you reach a high level, especially Olympia athletes or athletes that really want to compete at a professional level, it becomes more important. The importance to details is crucial, and one of those details is the quality of the food that you eat, the quality of the supplements, and the quality of the food. So, what type of food are you eating? Where does your chicken come from? Does it come from a Chinese farm who uses antibiotics, who is a highly dense farm where the health of a chicken is not taken in consideration. Just only the meat is important, and how you get this meat is not. Or does it come from a farm where they use only natural how you say it for animals, food, it will change how the impact that the food has on your body. How much toxins are in this is in the chicken, in the fish, in the rice, in anything that you eat. And over a short period of time, maybe you will not feel a big difference, but over a long run, it's obviously clear that if your food is organic, if your food is high quality, it will create less stress on your stomach, on your intestines, and overall on your metabolic function. So it's extremely important that your body stays healthy. And one of the ways to keep it healthy is to try to use high quality foods.
Great, great. Yes, I think the same, because the quality of food is so important for the healthy, for the good too, because the intestinal healthy is so important. In the IFBB Pro athletes is one of the most important thing, because if you have a correct absorption of the food, you of course achieve better condition, better growth, better results, of course. By the way, and in the other side, the dark side of the force, we have the cheat meal. I asked at all the coaches I interview the opinion about the cheat meal. What is your opinion about it?
Well, I think
Well,
first of all,
I mean with cheat meal, I mean junk food, of course.
well, I think you have to first of all see when you take in consideration doing a junk meal. Are you in the off season or are you in pre-contest? I think that the validity and the aspects of doing a cheat meal in a high caloric set is different than, for example, when you're very low calorie or you have been for a long time. So the impact that it can have is different. Now, that being said, I am 99.9% of the time not a fan of cheat meals, simply because I rarely see the type of metabolisms that actually can benefit from it. Now, if you talk to me about the mental aspect, it's one thing. If you talk to me about the physical metabolic aspect, that's another thing. If we talk specifically physiology, I mean your metabolism, I don't think that a cheat meal has any advantage. I sometimes even feel has a disadvantage, because you go to introduce most of the time, high fat diet, saturated fat diet, or high sugar content food, and a type of food which your stomach and your intestine is not used to. So most of the time I see more negative than positive from a cheat meal. Now, if you need, in a contest phase where you have been calorically deprived for a while, if you need to compensate, which happens very often, you compensate with more food because you're losing weight too much or you're ahead of time, I personally prefer to increase the calories that we are, or the type of food that we're already consuming. So you simply give more carbs, maybe more good fats, but I like to keep exactly the same type of food that we already are eating, which your body is accustomed to. In the off season, which sometimes can be a little longer and can be a little monotonous, I don't see any problem of, on the weekends going out with your friends or with your girlfriend, with your wife, and having a good meal. Absolutely not. But it's not a metabolic aspect. It's more of a mental aspect. It's trying to break the monotony a little bit, trying to get out of rhythm, try to maybe, forget about bodybuilding and the prep for a few hours. So it's absolutely something you want to do, but it's not a physical need. It's more of a mental, social aspect of things. Sometimes I happen to have athletes, but it's rare, which have really crazy metabolisms that sometimes even by eating clean food, at one point the metabolism is going so fast, you're turning over so many calories that in order to stop, to break a little bit this flow that your body's having, we have a cheat meal. We have maybe
Yeah.
some hamburger with some fries with a good dessert or something. That sometimes, calms the weight loss and this overreacting of your metabolism down a little bit or compensates it. But it's very rare, so it's very subjective.
Yes, it's very subjective, and you say that 99.9% you are not a favor of cheat meal, but it depends, as you know, as you said, about the season you are. If you are in pro contest, and not season, of course, and you say that is of course better for mentality, of course, because is one day off of the diet, one day off from your routine, right? Yes.
Exactly.
Right. Thank you. Okay, we have the answer completely. Perfect. And then I have the last question for you. Then I leave you with your family, with your girlfriend, and at your thing. It's a particular question about the Olympia because about the future after this year Olympia, after all that is going on. What will the future of Olympia be? And any prediction, of course, if the Olympia there will be?
Well, as we talked in private before we went online, as the situation is developing right now, especially in the United States, I see it very, very probable that we're going to have a Mr. Olympia this year. Maybe not because by September we are not out of this pandemic and we can go back to the gyms, but mainly because I think it will happen so late that most of the athletes will not be able to train and to prep properly to get to the Olympia. I hope I'm wrong, but as I see things develop and see the curve of the pandemic, how it's reaching its top, you have to imagine that the time that it takes to reach the highest number of contagious of the pandemic, you need to have at least 3 to 4 times a longer period of time in order to go back to zero. So if we take 5 to 7 weeks to reach the top of the pandemic, and we'll take anywhere from 15 to 25 weeks to come down. So by that time will be end of the summer, and it's going to be very difficult to be able to prep for Olympia. And I hope that they are not stupid enough to let us go out, do our normal things again as soon as they see the numbers come down, because every virologist will tell you that this is just going to re-aggravate the curve and we'll be back stuck home in no time. As far as who and what, I think that I really wanted to see a friend of mine, Big Ramy, show up at the Olympia improved from the Arnold Classic. I was very impressed with what he showed at the Arnold Classic. And I think that a little more time to work, refining his physique, he would be somebody very, very difficult to beat. Honestly, with a little more condition and detail, any of the other competitors that I saw at Arnold will have extremely difficult time beating him. So that's something as a fan of bodybuilding I wanted to see. And on the other side, I was hoping to have some of the athletes I work with, I have the pleasure to work with, show some improvement from their past physiques and see them on that Olympia stage. So that's something I was really looking forward to see, but unfortunately, it's not going to happen this year probably.
Yes, I hope for you that one of your athletes achieve these amazing goals and will be a great Olympia for all. I think, of course, the first thing, I think this situation improves soon because it's so difficult for us, it's difficult for all the world, and then to return to our normal life, and then finally enjoy the best contest of the world, the show, the best show of the world, and we will see. We will see because September
and to see you on the men's physique Olympia too, no?
I hope too.
You already have some points you told me, right? So
yes,
you needed a few more shows and you could make it too.
I'm the top 5, but it's a long season from now. But I work hard to achieve this dream.
You're young. You're young, unfortunately. So
yeah,
and, you can take this time to really work on improving your physique. So nothing is lost.
Never stop, of course. Then, for me, is an honor to interview Patrick, and thanks for your time, Patrick. Thanks for your ability, and a big thanks from Italy and the world. And I hope that the situation, as I said, improves soon. Then we could return to our normal life, enjoy time with our family, our friend, and finally to work out in our happy place, the gym. But first, remember, stay at home, do it for you and for the people who you love. And then,
Exactly.
this is Excelsior Talk from me and Patrick. See you guys.
See you.